I think I'm actually live now. I tried going live a bit earlier. I really hope my mic is currently working. I'm doing an entirely new camera and mic setup. I have missed so much being here. So let's give this a shot. I thought it would be an excellent opportunity to just get back into the swing of things with some Borges, and I will do the Garden of Forking Paths. And if I have any issues with lag or my mic, please just let me know in the chat, okay? The Garden of Forking Paths. On page 22 of Liddell Hart's History of World War I, you will read that an attack against Serre-Montbon line by the British division, supported by 1,400 artillery pieces, planned for the 24th of July, 1916, had to be postponed until the morning of the 29th. The torrential rains, Captain Liddell Hart comments, caused this delay, an insignificant one to be sure. The following statement, dictated, reread, and signed by Dr. Yu Sun, former professor of English at Hochschule at Tsingtao. I definitely mispronouncing this, my apologies. And my camera just slid, god damn it. One of the hazards of a new setup, the camera is falling. I currently have it propped up on something propped up on something else. Dr. Yu Song throws an unexpected light over the whole affair. The first 2 pages of the document are missing. My mic is working, right? We have sound? Oh, yes! We have sound. Awesome. Please let me know if the levels are okay and if it's too loud, if I need to adjust to the bit. I don't want to blow anyone's ears out with my enthusiasm. And I hung up the receiver. Immediately afterwards, I recognized the voice that had answered in German. It was that of Captain Richard Madden. Madden's presence in Victor Runeberg's apartment meant the end of our anxieties. But this seemed, or should have seemed, very secondary to me. Also, the end of our lives. It meant that Runeberg had been arrested or murdered. Before the sun set that day, I would encounter the same fate. Madden was implacable. Or, rather, he was obliged to be so. An Irishman at the service of England, a man accused of laxity and perhaps of treason. How could he fail to seize and be thankful for such a miraculous opportunity? The discovery, capture, and maybe even the deaths of the 2 agents of the German Reich. I went up to my room. Absurdly, I locked the door and threw myself onto the back of my narrow iron cot. Through the window I saw the familiar roofs and the cloud-shaded 6 o'clock sun. It seemed incredible to me that that day, without premonitions or symbols, would be one of my inexorable death. In spite of my dead father, in spite of having been a child in the symmetrical garden of Haifeng, was I now, going to die? Then I reflected that everything happens to a man precisely and precisely now. Centuries of centuries, and only in the present do things happen, countless men in the air, on the fence of the earth and the sea. And all that is really happening is happening to me. The almost intolerable recollection of Madden's horse-like face banished these wanderings. In the midst of my hatred and terror, it means nothing to me now to speak of terror, now that I have mocked Richard Madden. Now that my throat yearns for that noose. It occurred to me that that tumultuous and doubtless happy warrior did not suspect that I possessed the secret. He has the secret. That secret. Okay, there we go. The name of the exact location of the new British artillery park on the River Anker. A bird streaked across the gray sky, and blindly I translated it into an airplane, and that airplane into many against the French sky, annihilating the artillery station with vertical bombs. If only my mouth, before a bullet shattered it, could cry out that secret name so it could be heard in Germany. But my human voice was very weak. How might I make it carry to the ear of the chief, to the ear of that sick and hateful man who knew nothing of Runeberg, and me, save that we were in Staffordshire, and who was waiting in vain for our report in his arid office in Berlin, endlessly examining newspapers? I said out loud, I must flee. I sat up noiselessly, in a useless perfection of silence, as if Madam were already lying in wait for me. Something, perhaps the vain ostentation of proving my resources were nil, made me look through my pockets. I found what I knew what I would find. The American watch, the nickel chain, and the square coin, the key ring with the incriminating, useless keys to Runeberg's apartment, the notebook, a letter which I resolved to destroy immediately, and which I did not destroy, a crown, 2 shillings, and a few pence, and a red and blue pencil, the handkerchief, the revolver with 1 bullet. Absurdly, I took it in my hand and weighed it in order to inspire courage within myself. Vaguely, I thought that the pistol report could be heard at a great distance. In 10 minutes, my plan was perfected. The phone book listed the name of the only person capable of transmitting the message. He lived in a suburb of Fenton, less than a half-hour's train ride away. I am a cowardly man. I say it now that I have carried it to its end, a plan whose perilous nature no one can deny. I know its execution was terrible. I didn't do it for Germany, no. I care nothing for a barbarous country which imposed upon me the objection of being a spy. Besides, I know of a man from England, a modest man, who for me is no less great than Goethe. Goat. I talked with him for scarcely an hour, but during that hour he was himself. I did it because I sensed the chief somehow feared people of my race, for the innumerable ancestors who merge within me. I wanted to prove to him that a yellow man could save his armies. Besides, I had to flee from Captain Madden. His hands and his voice could call at my door at any moment. I dressed silently, bade farewell to myself in the mirror, went downstairs, scrutinized the peaceful street, and went out. The section was not far from my home, but I judged it wise to take a cab. I argued that in this way I ran less of a risk of being recognized. The fact is that in the deserted street I felt myself visible and vulnerable, infinitely so. I remember that I told the cab driver to stop a short distance before the main entrance, and I got out with voluntary, almost painful slowness. I was going to the village of Ashgrove, but I bought a ticket for a more distant station. The train left within a very few minutes. At 8:50, I hurried, and the next one would leave at 9:30. There was hardly a soul on the platform. I went through the coaches. I remember a few farmers, a woman dressed in mourning, a young boy who was reading with fervor the Annals of Tacitus, a wounded and happy soldier. The coaches jerked forward at last. A man whom I recognized ran in vain to the end of the platform. It was Captain Richard Madden. Shattered, trembling, I shrank into the far corner of the seat, away from the dreaded window. From this broken state I passed into an almost abject felicity. I told myself the duel had already begun and that I had won the first encounter by frustrating, even if for 40 minutes, even if by a stroke of fate, the attack of my adversary. I argued that the slightest of victories foreshadowed a total victory. I argued, no less fallaciously, that my cowardly felicity proved that I was a man capable of carrying out the adventure successfully. From this weakness I took strength that did not abandon me. I foresee the man will resign himself each day to more atrocious undertakings, and soon there will be no one but warriors and brigands. I give them this counsel. The author of an atrocious undertaking ought to imagine that he has already accomplished it, ought to impose upon himself a future as irrevocable as the past. Thus I proceeded, as my eyes of a man already dead registered the elapsing of that day, which perhaps was the last in the diffusion of the night. The train gently ran along amid ash trees. It stopped almost in the middle of the fields. No one announced the name of the station. Ashgrove? I asked a few lads on the platform. Ashgrove, they replied, and I got off. A lamp enlightened the platform, but the faces of the boys were in shadow. One questioned me, "Are you going to Dr. Stephen Albert's house?" Without waiting for my answer, another said, "The house is a long way from here, but you won't get lost if you take this road to the left, and at every crossroads turn again to your left." I tossed them a coin, my last, and descended a few stone steps and started down the solitary road. It went downhill, slowly. It was of elemental earth. Overhead the branches were tangled. The low, full moon seemed to accompany me. For an instant I thought that Richard Madden in some way had penetrated my desperate plan. Very quickly I understood that that was impossible. The instructions to turn always to the left reminded me that such was a common procedure for discovering the central point of certain labyrinths. I have some understanding of labyrinths. Not for nothing am I the great-grandson of that Surfon who was governor of Yunnan and renounced worldly power in order to write a novel that might even be more populous than the Hung Lu Main, and to construct a labyrinth in which all men would become lost. I apologize in advance for further butcherings of Romanized Chinese words. 13 years he dedicated to these heterogeneous tasks, but the hand of a younger stranger murdered him, and his novel was incoherent, and no one found the labyrinth. Beneath English trees I meditated on that lost maze. I imagined it inviolate and perfect at the secret crest of a mountain. I imagined it erased by rice fields or beneath the water. I imagined it infinite, no longer composed of octagonal kiosks and returning paths, but of rivers and provinces and of kingdoms. I thought of a labyrinth of labyrinths, one of Sanya's spreading labyrinth that would encompass the past and the future and in some way involve the stars. Absorbed in these illusory images, I forgot my destiny of one pursued. I felt myself to be, for an unknown period of time, an abstract perceiver of the world. The vague, living countryside, the moon, the remains of the day worked on me, as well as the slope of the road which eliminated any possibility of weariness. The afternoon was intimate and infinite. The road descended and forked among the now confused meadows. A high-pitched, almost syllabic music approached me and receded in the shifting of the wind, dimmed by leaves and distance. I thought that a man can be an enemy of other men, of the moments of other men, but not of the country. Not of fireflies, words, gardens, streams of water, sunsets. Thus I arrived before a tall and rusty gate. Between the iron bars I made out a poplar grove and a pavilion. I understood suddenly two things, the first trivial, the second almost unbelievable. The music came from the pavilion, and the music was Chinese. For precisely that reason I had openly accepted it without paying it any heed. I do not remember whether there was a bell or whether I knocked it with my hand, and the sparkling of the music continued. From the rear of the house within the lantern approached. A lantern that the trees sometimes striped and sometimes eclipsed, a paper lantern that had the form of a drum and the color of the moon. A tall man bore it. I didn't see his face, for the light blinded me. He opened the door and said slowly, in my own language, "I see that the pious Haifsang persists in correcting my solitude. You no doubt wish to see the garden?" I recognized the name of one of our consuls, and I replied, disconcerted, "The garden?" "The garden of forking paths." Something stirred in my memory, and I entered with incomprehensible uncertainty. "The garden of my ancestor." "Your ancestor?" Your illustrious ancestor? Come in. The damp path zigzagged like those of my childhood. We came to the library of Eastern and Western books. I recognized, bound in yellow silk, several volumes of the Lost Encyclopedia, edited by the third emperor of the Luminous Dynasty, but never printed. The record on the phonograph revolved next to a bronze phoenix. I also recall a familial rolls case and another many centuries older, that of the shade of blue, which our craftsmen copied from the potters of Persia. Stephen Albert observed me with a smile. He was, as I have said, a very tall, sharp-featured, with grey eyes and a grey beard. He told me that he had been a missionary in Sian before aspiring to become a sinologist. We sat down, I on the long, low divan, and he with his back to the window and a tall, circular clock. I calculated that my pursuer, Richard Madden, could not arrive for at least an hour. My irrevocable determination could wait. An astounding fate, that of your ancestor, Stephen Albert had said. Governor of his native province, learned in astronomy and in astrology and in the tireless interpretation of the canonical books, chess player, famous poet, and calligrapher, he abandoned all of this in order to compose a book and a maze. He renounced the pleasures of both tyranny and justice, of populous couch, of his banquets, and even of erudition, all to close himself up for 13 years in the pavilion of the limpid solitude. When he died, his heirs found nothing but save chaotic manuscripts. His family, as you may be aware, wished to condemn them to the fire, but his executor, a Taoist or a Buddhist monk, insisted on their publication. We descendants of Sufan, I replied, continued to curse that monk. Their publication was senseless. The book is an indeterminate heap of contradictory drafts. I examined it once. In the third chapter, the hero dies. In the fourth, he is alive. As for the other undertaking of Sufan, his labyrinth, here is his labyrinth, Albert said, indicating a tall lacquered desk. An ivory labyrinth, I exclaimed. A minimum labyrinth. A labyrinth of symbols, he corrected, an invisible labyrinth of time. To me, a barbarous Englishman, has been entrusted with the revelation of this diaphanous mystery. After more than 100 years, the details are irretrievable, but it is not hard to conjecture what had happened. Sufan must have said once, "I am withdrawing to write a book," and another time, "I am withdrawing to construct a labyrinth." Everyone imagined 2 weeks. To no one did it occur that the book and the maze were one and the same thing. The pavilion of the limpid solitude stood in the center of a garden that was perhaps intricate. The circumstance could have suggested to the heirs a physical labyrinth. Sufan died. No one in the vast territories that were his came upon the labyrinth, and the confusion of the novel suggested to me that it was the maze. 2 circumstances gave me the correct solution of the problem. One, the curious legend that Sufan had planned to create a labyrinth which would be strictly infinite. The other, a fragment of a letter that I had discovered. Albert rose. He turned his back onto me for a moment, and he opened a drawer of the black and the gold desk. He faced me, and in his hands he held a sheet of paper that had once been crimson but was now pink and tenuous and cross-sectioned. The fame of Sufan as a calligrapher had been justly won. I read, uncomprehendingly, with fervor, these words written with a minute brush by a man of my blood. I leave to the various futures, not to all, my garden of forking paths. Wordlessly I returned to the sheet. Albert continued. I'm going to use an Albert voice so I can keep things straight. Before unearthing this letter, I had questioned myself about the ways in which a book can be infinite. I could think of nothing other than a cyclic volume, a circular one. A book whose last page was identical to the first, a book had the possibility of continuing indefinitely. I remembered, too, that night which is at the middle of the 1001 Nights, where Scheherazade, through a magical oversight of the copyist, begins to relate a word for word the story of the 1,001 Nights, establishing the risk of coming again to the night when she must repeat it thus on to infinity. I imagined as well a Platonic, hereditary work transmitted from father to son, in which each new individual chapter corrects with pious care the pages of his elders. These conjectures diverted me, but none seemed to correspond, not even remotely, to the contradictory chapters of Su Fen. In the midst of his perplexity, I received from Oxford the manuscript that you have examined. I lingered naturally on one sentence. I leave to the various futures, not to all, my garden of forking paths. Come here. Yeah. Here we go. Almost instantly I understood. The Garden of Forking Paths was the chaotic novel. The phrase, the various futures, not to all, suggested to me the forking in time, not in space. A broad rereading of the work confirmed this theory. In all fictional works, each time a man is confronted with several alternatives, he chooses one and eliminates the others. In the fiction of Su Fen, he chooses, simultaneously, all of them. He creates in this way diverse features, diverse futures, diverse times, which themselves also proliferate and fork. Here, then, is the explanation of the novel's contradictions. Fang, let us say, has a secret. A stranger calls at his door. Fang resolves to kill him. And, naturally, there are several possible outcomes. Fang can kill the intruder can kill Fang. They both can escape, they both can die, and so forth. In the work of Su Fen, all possible outcomes occur, each one is the point of departure for the other forkings. Sometimes the paths of this labyrinth converge. For example, you arrive at this house, but in one of the possible paths you are my enemy, in another my friend. Terrible accent. If you will resign yourself to my incurable pronunciation, we shall that's a forking path moment right there. If you will resign yourself to my incurable pronunciation, we shall read a few pages. His face, within the vivid circle of the lamplight, was unquestionably that of an old man, but with something unalterable about it, even immortal. He read, with the slow precision, 2 versions across the same epic chapter. In the first, an army marches to a battle across a lonely mountain, the horror of the rocks and shadows make the men undervalue their lives, and they gain an easy victory. In the second, the same army traverses a palace where a great festival is currently taking place. The resplendent battle seems to them a continuation of the celebration, and they win the victory. I listened with a proper veneration to these ancient narratives, perhaps less admirable in themselves in the fact that they had been created by my blood and being restored to me by a man of a remote empire in the course of a desperate adventure on the Western Isle. I remember the last words repeated in each version like a secret commandment. Thus fought the heroes, tranquil, their admirable hearts, violent their swords, resigned to kill and to die. From that moment I felt about me and within my dark body an invisible, entangling swarming. Not the swarming of the divergent, parallel, and finally coalescent armies, but a more inaccessible, more intimate agitation that they in some manner prefigured. I'm not doing the Albert accent, no, I can't. Stephen Albert continued. I don't believe that your illustrious ancestor played idly with these variations. I don't consider it credible that he would sacrifice 13 years to the infinite execution of a rhetorical experiment. In your country, the novel is a subsidiary form of literature. In Su Fen's time, it was a despicable form. Su Fen was a brilliant novelist, but he was also a man of letters who doubtless did not consider himself a mere novelist. The testimony of his contemporaries proclaims, and his life fully confirms, his metaphysical and mystical interests. Philosophic controversy usurps a good part of the novel. I know that all of the problems, none disturbed him so greatly nor worked him upon him so much as the abysmal problem of time. Now then, the latter is the only problem that does not figure in the pages of the garden. He does not even use the word that signifies time. How would you explain this voluntary omission? I proposed several solutions, all unsatisfactory. We discussed them. Finally, Stephen Albert said to me, "In a riddle whose answer is chess, what is the only prohibited word?" I thought for a moment and replied, "The word chess." "Precisely," said Albert. "The Garden of Forking Paths is an enormous riddle, or a parable, whose theme is time, whose recondite cause prohibits its mention. To omit a word always, to resort to inept metaphors and obvious paraphrases, it is perhaps the most emphatic way of stressing it. That is the tortuous method preferred in each of the meanderings of his indefatigable by the oblique souffle. I have compared hundreds of manuscripts. I have corrected the errors that the negligence of the copyists had introduced. I have guessed the plan of this chaos, and I have reestablished, I believe at least I have reestablished, the primordial organization. I have translated the entire work. It is clear to me that not once does he employ the word time. This explanation is obvious. The Garden of Forking Paths is an incomplete but not false image of the universe as Souffon conceived it. In contrast to Newton and Schopenhauer, your ancestor did not believe in a uniform, absolute time. He believed in an infinite series of times, in a growing, dizzying net of divergent, convergent, and parallel times. This network of times which approached one another, forked, broke off, or were unaware of one another for even centuries, embraces all possibilities of time. In some you exist, and not I, in others and not you, in others both of us. The present one, which a favorable fate has granted me, you have arrived at my house. In another, while crossing the garden, you found me dead. In another, I utter these same words, but I am a mistake, a ghost. In every one, I pronounce, not without a tremble to my voice, I am grateful to you and revere you for your recreation of the garden of Souffin. Not in all, he murmured with a smile. Time forks perpetually towards innumerable futures. In one of them, I am your enemy. God dang it. One of these days, I'll actually hook this thing up to a tripod. Here we go. Time forks perpetually. Time forks perpetually toward innumerable futures. In one of them, I am your enemy. Once again, I felt the swarming sensation of which I had spoken. It seemed to be that the humid garden that surrounded the house was infinitely saturated with invisible persons. Those persons were Albert and I, secret, busy, and multiform in other dimensions of time. I raised my eyes, and the tenuous nightmare dissolved. In the yellow and black garden there was only one man, but this man was as strong as a statue. This man was approaching along the path, and he was Captain Richard Madden. The future already exists, I replied, but I am your friend. Could I see the letter again? Albert rose. Standing tall, he opened a drawer of the tall desk. For the moment his back was to me. I readied the revolver, and I fired with extreme caution. Albert fell uncomplainingly, immediately. I swear his death was instantaneous, a lightning stroke. The rest is real, insignificant. Madden broke in, arrested me, and I have been condemned to the gallows. I have won out abominably. I have communicated to Berlin the secret name of the city they must attack. They bombed it yesterday. I read it in the same papers they offered to England, the mystery of the learned sinologist, Stephen Albert, who was murdered by a stranger, one Yusson. The chief had deciphered this mystery. He knew it was my problem. He knew my problem was to indicate, through the uproar of the war, the city called Albert, and that I had found no other means to do so than to kill a man of that name. He does not know, no one else can know, my innumerable contrition and weariness. So that was The Garden of Forking Paths by Borges from Labyrinths. It's not personally one of my favorite Borges story, especially from this one. Actually, I wonder how long my favorite one is. If it's less than just a few pages, I think I may do it. But no, oh. Okay. Yeah, no, I am definitely really out of practice. So, okay. Oh, it's not the correct one. Where are you? I hope you all are doing well. I've missed streaming. I know serious reads don't make for a lot of fun hijinks in the chat, but you all, like literally the group, the cluster has been in my thoughts given recent events. Yes, here we go. The House of Hysterion. And the queen gave birth to a child who was called Asterion. Apollodorus, Bibliotheca. I know they accuse me of arrogance and perhaps of misanthropy and perhaps of madness. Such accusations, for which I shall extract punishment in due time, are derisory. It is true that I never leave my house, but it is also true that its doors, whose number is infinite, are open day and night to men, and to animals as well. Anyone may enter. He will find here no female pomp nor gallant court formality, but he will find quiet and solitude. And he will also find a house like no other on the face of the earth. There are those who declare there is a similar one in Egypt, but they lie. Even my detractors admit there is not one single piece of furniture in the house. Another ridiculous falsehood has it that I, Asterion, am a prisoner. Shall I repeat that there are no locked doors? Shall I add that there are no locks? Besides, one afternoon I did step into the street. If I returned before night, I did so because of the fear of the faces of common people inspired in me, faces as discolored and flat as the palm of one's hand. The sun had already set, but the helpless crying of a child and the rude supplications of the faithful told me that I had been recognized. The people prayed, fled, prostrated themselves. Some climbed onto the stelabate of the temple of Axes. Others gathered stones. One of them, I believe, hid himself beneath the sea. Not for nothing was my mother a queen. I cannot be confused with the populace, though my modesty might so desire. The fact is that I am unique. I am not interested in what one man may transmit to other men. Like the philosopher, I think that nothing is communicable by the art of writing. Bothersome and trivial details have no place in my spirit, which is prepared for all that is vast and grand. I have never retained the difference between one letter and another. A certain generous impatience has not permitted that I learn to read. Sometimes I deplore this, for the nights and days are long. Of course, I am not without distractions. Like the ram about to charge, I run through the stone galleries until I fall dizzy to the floor. I crouch in the shadow of a pool or round a corner and pretend that I am being followed. There are roofs from which I let myself fall until I am bloody. At any time I can pretend to be asleep with my eyes closed and my breathing heavy. Sometimes I really sleep. Sometimes the color of the day has changed when I open my eyes. But of all the games, I prefer the one about the other Asterion. I pretend that when he comes to visit me, and that now is the time I will show him my house. With great obseisance, I say to him, "Now we shall return to the first intersection," or, "Now we shall come out into another courtyard," or, "I know you would like the drain," or, "Now you will see a pool that was filled with sand," or, "You will soon see how the cellar branches out." Sometimes I make a mistake and the two of us laugh heartily. Not only have I imagined these games, I have also meditated on the house. All the parts of the house are repeated many times. Any place is another place. There is no one pool, courtyard, drinking trough, manger. The mangers, drinking troughs, courtyards, pools are 14, infinite in number. The house is the same size as the world, or rather, it is the world. However, by dint of exhausting the courtyards with pools and dusty grey stone galleries, I have reached the street and seen the temple of Axes in the sea. I did not understand this until a night vision revealed to me that the seas and temples are also 14, infinite in number. Everything is repeated many times. 14 times, but two things in the world seem to only be once. Above, the intricate sun, and below, Asterion. Perhaps I've created the stars and the sun and this enormous house, but I can no longer remember. Every 9 years, 9 men enter the house so that I may deliver them from all evil. I hear their steps or their voices in the depths of the stone galleries, and I run joyfully to find them. The ceremony lasts a few minutes. They fall one after another without my having to bloody my hands. They remain where they fell, and their bodies help distinguish one gallery from another. I do not know who they are, but I know that one of them prophesied at the moment of his death that someday my Redeemer would come. Since then, my loneliness does not pain me, because I know my Redeemer lives, and he will finally rise above the dust. If my ear could capture all of the sounds of the world, I should hear his steps. I hope that he will take me to a place with fewer galleries and fewer doors. What will my Redeemer be like, I ask myself. Will he be a bull or a man? Will he perhaps be a bull with the face of a man, or will he be like me? The morning sun reverberated from the bronze sword. There were no longer even a vestige of blood. "Would you believe it, Ariadne?" said Theseus. "The Minotaur scarcely defended himself." And that is my favorite short story by Borges, The House of Hysterion. Anyway, for those who tuned in this evening, thank you for chilling out with me and listening to me, and I hope you enjoyed it. I look forward to doing this way more frequently and getting kind of back into the swing of things. Yes, with more weird, self-published bad fiction, but maybe some serious stuff interspersed now and again too. But thank you so much. Love to you all. Be safe. And what's a good catchphrase? Oh my gosh, I can't believe I forgot. Good afternoon, good evening, and good night from your Philbook / lusty literature memes, Doomer GF.